If your child was being kidnapped, wouldn't you do anything, including authorizing the use of deadly force to stop them? Of course you would. Yet some bureaucrats and politicians in Albany want to make it illegal to use deadly force, even in cases of murder, rape, or to stop a kidnapping in progress. Your family's safety is at risk. We must stand together and protect New Yorkers now. Take action. Click the link, join the coalition. No on S6615.
Hello, this is Brian Sullivan, President of the Nassau County Correctional Officers Benevolent Association. The video presentation that you just saw was produced by the Police Conference of New York State, and it relates to the next problem that we all have as law enforcement officers and citizens in New York State as we go further down the rabbit hole of insanity that I'll call it in this state. From the same people that brought us bail reform and discovery reform, halt legislation, took away the ability for judges to have discretion over whether or not somebody belongs in jail or should just be cut loose into the street. We have a new thing on our horizon that brings us even further down the rabbit hole. Attorney General Letitia James, who is the top law enforcement officer in New York State, announced on May 21st new sweeping legislation that may or may not get done by the end of this legislative session, which is in about a week and a half, 2 weeks. This piece of legislation would dramatically change something that's near and dear to all of us as law enforcement officers, which is Article 35 of the Penal Law. Now, we all know that we have a lot in common with our police brethren. We have a lot not in common with police. Corrections is obviously a different job, but one of the main things that we have in common with all law enforcement in New York State is Article 35 of the Penal Law, which is the defense of justification. Now, just to remind everybody, justification for the use of physical force or deadly physical force in defense of a person or oneself. We learn this in the academy. We learn a little bit of it in service. Just to remind everybody, a person may, subject to the provisions of this part, use physical force or deadly physical force upon another person when and to the extent that he or she reasonably believes that to be necessary to defend himself, herself, or a third person from what they reasonably believe to be the use of imminent force or unlawful physical force by such person. Additionally, you believe that such other person is using or about to use deadly physical force. Even in such case, however, you may not use deadly physical force if you know that with complete safety to yourself or someone else, you can stop this action by retreating to protect yourself and it doesn't resolve in any other force. Or if you are a police officer or peace officer assisting another police officer or peace officer at their direction to stop someone's actions, or you reasonably believe that such other person is committing or attempting to commit kidnapping, forcible rape, forcible criminal sexual act, or robbery. Now, this new legislation, which is number S for Senate, S6615, you may have seen a little bit online. You may have seen some of our cousins in law enforcement talking about these things. I just want to briefly touch on what our Attorney General describes what these sweeping legislation, how it would change. These are the words. There's some other legislators that I'm going to quote in this also. New York State Attorney General Letitia James today announced legislation to change New York State's laws governing police violence to strengthen prosecutors' ability to hold police officers accountable. This also includes peace officers, let's not forget, for unjustified and excessive use of force. Now, that should bring everybody's attention to perk your ears up and say, was that the New York State Attorney General, the top law enforcement official in the state, wants to address police violence as if that's a thing that legitimately goes on every day? I don't know. We're really in a bad way in New York State. This law would seek to amend New York's laws that justify police use of force, which currently sets an exceedingly high standard for prosecuting police officers and peace officers who have improperly used deadly or excessive force. The centerpiece of the legislation seeks to amend the use of force law from one of simple necessity, which is stopping the act of someone else, to one of absolute last resort. Now think about what last resort means. Last resort means that you've tried to get this other person to stop their actions. You've tried to get them to stop the kidnapping, the rape, the forcible act, trying to kill someone else. But this checklist that they want all law enforcement to go through in your mind, de-escalation techniques, all kinds of other, less than lethal force. We have that already. All of this is already done, except for the fact that, particularly in our job, we don't have training for it, at least not to our standards that we see. But the absolute last resort, which means either I die or you die. It's not to stop or the escalation of force. It's not to stop someone from kidnapping your child, as you saw in that video, or to stop a forcible sexual act. You're supposed to ask nicely before you do anything, before you put your hands on somebody. Again, the Attorney General's words, for far too long, police officers and peace officers in this country have been able to evade accountability for the unjustified use of excessive and lethal force. In New York, our laws have essentially given blanket police protections and defense to use of force and interaction with the public. I don't know how I can more adequately state what a complete falsehood that is. We all know from our own department, from other departments, that people are held accountable all the time. There are standard operating procedures in place. Even the Article 35 of the penal law states plainly that you can use justified physical force or deadly physical force when it's meeting the equal amount of force or enough to stop the other one's actions. We must continue to do everything in our power to protect our communities and ensure that no one is beyond the reach of justice. All of this falsehood that's based on this progressive narrative that we've been fighting here for the last couple of years. The overview of the Police Accountability Act is that these legislative reforms are intended to reduce deaths at the hands of police and peace officers by assuring that we adhere to practices and tactics that aim to preserve life. From the first day that I started this job, everything that you're taught about deadly force or physical force is to protect life and to preserve life. To insinuate otherwise is an insult to anybody that has ever put on a uniform in this state. Use of force must be a last resort, as I said before. We have SOPs before using force. All of this stuff is basically built into all of our laws, the last 50 years in particular in New York State. How we can say that it's aside from, obviously there are one or two bad actors that are held accountable, people are fired, people go to jail. It's happened in the New York City Police Department several times. To say that this is some sort of an ongoing culture is insulting. Simple suspicion of criminal conduct cannot justify legal force. The Police Accountability Act seeks to eliminate justification. These are the buzzwords, remember. The defense of justification, Article 35 of the penal law, seeks to eliminate justification for lethal force when an officer simply suspects an individual has engaged in a particular criminal conduct. Lethal force should only be used in the most exigent of circumstances, demands higher proof of standards. That already exists. These are all buzzwords, and I don't know whether our legislators are looking at higher office or they're afraid of these progressives. I don't understand why they're claiming that this stuff does not exist now when it all does. The biggest thing here that's a threat that I'm bringing to you, my members, is that they want to allow prosecutors to evaluate if police conduct led to the need of the use of force. Now it's like forcibly, we don't want anybody putting hands on anybody to stop any level of crime. Physical, I'm not even talking about deadly physical force to stop someone from committing a crime, stop someone in one of our dormitories from slashing somebody else's face, out in the street, the average person from stopping a kidnapping of your child, for stopping your sister from getting sexually assaulted. You have to go through this checklist in your head, otherwise you're going to be held criminally responsible, potentially, under the Police Accountability Reform Act. An officer may not avail themselves of the justification of the defense if prosecutors consider whether that officer's conduct created a substantial and unjustifiable risk. What exactly is the bar? They're not claiming what the bar is. The bar is already in the law. You're going to stop the actions of someone else to preserve and protect life. Now we're going to put on there that you can't avail yourself because of some arbitrary theory that you went too far in stopping it. It's absolute nonsense. One of the sponsors of this, Senator Kevin Parker, said that this law seeks to establish criminal penalties for police and peace officers who employ force that is grossly in excess of what is warranted under the circumstances. Who's going to decide what's warranted under the circumstances? We all know that this happens in court later on, and we all have to make split decisions as law enforcement officers. But this legislation, if enacted, is going to get one of us killed. It's going to get a correction officer killed. It's going to get a police officer killed. anybody because you're not going to act according to your training. You're going to act whether or not you're going to get sued or brought to, on a criminal charge because of this. Again, Senator Parker states, our legal system makes it far too difficult to achieve fairness where police violence is concerned. Police violence, as if this is a thing, and that's also stated by Democratic Senate Leader Mike Gianaris out of Queens. Stating this stuff as if it's a fact, that we come to work every day in a culture of violence, it's mind-boggling to me. Currently, the excessive use of force is a term of poetry in New York State, says Senator Kevin Parker. I love the wording taken with this. The use of excessive force by police and peace officers has not only taken loved ones and family members, but encourages a continuous scourge for our communities. Police and peace officers are a scourge on our communities because all we do is come to work with the intent of beating and killing people. That's what our elected leaders in Albany are telling us. The Police Accountability Act will make it clearly understood that the state of New York will not tolerate individuals in law enforcement who deviate from the mission of protecting and serving. That already exists. We already have assault laws. We have unjustifiable use of force labeled in all of our assault laws. We're held to a higher standard, but the same standard as anybody else when it comes to putting your hands on people. It's mind-boggling to me that this is even a conversation we're having. Establishing explicit standards and expectations for officers, coupled with criminal penalties to create a system where justice is equitable and responsibility can be had. New York State Assembly member Nick Perry states, today we answer the call of the people in New York State who have spoken up loudly and clearly. The people in New York State have been speaking up loudly and clearly about what's been done to the criminal justice system in New York. We can see by the incredible increase in crime in New York City in particular. You can't ride a subway. I won't let my wife or anybody in my family go into New York City. Crime is up everywhere, and every one of these legislators, and now our Attorney General is saying it's the cops' fault. It's law enforcement's fault, and they're going to take away tools to stop us from protecting each other and protecting the community from these violent predators. On behalf of those men and women who are taken from their families and loved ones far too soon because police use unjustified excessive force, Assemblymember Nick Perry said, the shoot first mentality must end, whether you wear a badge or not. Shoot first mentality. Somebody in Albany thinks that we live in the Wild West, and the first thing we're doing is pulling out our guns and pointing them at people and beating people unjustifiably. This act will save lives and make the use of deadly force an absolute last resort. Misconduct and abuse of power is culturally ingrained with our police forces, and we must work together to bring it to an end, says Assemblymember Catalina Cruz. The unjustified and excessive use of force, as well as lack of accountability. Does anybody in New York State, in any department, think there is a lack of accountability for your actions? Insane. Destroying relationships between the police and the communities that they have been tasked to serve. Just a few years ago, crime was at its lowest in New York State over the last 30 years. We all remember that, well, maybe not all because I'm old, but we all remember back in the 70s, New York City was a complete shithole. There was crime rampant everywhere, crack, AIDS. Our jail here had over 2,100, 2,200 inmates, and 2 of our buildings didn't exist. That was 30 years ago. We went through a period where crime was completely cleaned up. Our communities were safe. Even higher crime areas were safer. You could walk the streets. People could push baby carriages around. We are obviously on a complete swing back to those days. Some people think that's better for our communities, is to have the police's hands handcuffed, the correction officers' hands have to be tied. We're the cause of all the problems in the world. It's absolute insanity. And every time we turn around, there's another piece of legislation coming out that just spirals us further down into chaos. Where this ends, I have no idea. Now, there's an online petition that I'd like to all, and you'll see below the video, there's a couple of links that I'm not going to put them on here. Our internet person is going to put the links on. It'll be on the video. But below the video, you'll see under the title, there's 3 links. Actually, it'll be 4 links because I'm going to put the video at the beginning from the police conference also. That video is going to be on there about what they're taking, what they want to take off the books. There's also going to be a link to an online petition that I hope everybody goes on and signs on to, where we tell all of our legislators that we want this to stop. We want Senate Bill number S6615 taken off the agenda. It hasn't been voted on. It's sitting in committees right now. Like I said, there's less than 2 weeks to go in the session. This thing can't even make it to the floor. We want this insanity to stop, and for our members, our family members, and friends to make sure that our legislators know this insanity has to stop. So you'll see below, and they'll be labeled to do each one. Just to reiterate a little bit of what's going on here, if your child was being taken, kidnapped, and pulled into a van by a sex trafficker, would you authorize the use of force or deadly physical force to stop that from happening? I don't even think that needs an answer. It's obvious. Bureaucrats and politicians in Albany want that to stop. They don't want you to be able to use force or deadly physical force to protect your child, your wife, yourself in some of the situations that we find ourselves in. They're currently working on this law that would make it a crime to use force or deadly physical force if you're trying to arrest someone or stop one who is committing a murder, forcible rape, forcible criminal sex acts, or even to stop a kidnapping from happening. This is the laws that are being written in New York State. Sex trafficking cases are up 70% in New York State in 2020. Crime is on the rise everywhere. Watch the news. Watch Channel 4 News at 6 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night. Let's talk about all the shootings. There was a New York City mayoral candidate gave a press conference yesterday in Tompkins Square Park in the city, which is only 20 miles from us, folks. We're not talking about, California, where it's the site of shootings, rampant drug use, rampant slashings. People have weapons left and right. Several members of the community came to see this one person that was given a press conference. This mayoral candidate got up and talked about how the cops in New York City are the problem. 25 minutes about how the cops are the problem. We have to defund the cops. We have to take money away and give everything to these social programs while no one does anything about crime. In Nassau County and Suffolk County, thankfully, we live in a different community. We know that our community backs the police. They back our correction officers, even though obviously our correction officers are hidden from view. But we try our best to get it out there. I'm going to get this message out there also. We need to get together, stand across party lines, and do what's right and just to keep our families safe. Join your friends and neighbors in the broad coalition by signing on to this online petition. Also, below it, I'm putting a link on here so you can look up, if you're unfamiliar, who your senator is or who your assembly person is. We're going to make it nice and easy. You click on the link, you type in your address or even just if you don't want to put your address in, you can put your zip code in. You'll find out who your senator is, who your assembly person is. I need you need you to call your elected representative in Albany. I know people don't want to get involved. People just seem to sit back and watch the world go by. It's easier to play video games at home and think somebody else is worrying about this stuff. You are a law enforcement officer. They're talking about taking away your Article 35 justification for use of force protections, not just for you, but also for your families. You need to get a hold of your senator, of your assembly person, and tell them you want this nonsense stopped. You want this nonsense stopped, and you want law and order to become a priority in New York State and in Nassau County. Look at the links below. Again, I said it's the video, the online petition. Look up your address for Senate and Assembly. Get involved. Don't sit back. I can't do this for everybody on this job. You have to tell your elected officials, yourself, and your friends, and your family, everybody else on this job. The police are doing it across New York State. Let them know this bullshit has to end. Thank you and stay safe.